Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to TeamSense Tuesday webinar. This Tuesday's webinar is looking back on 2023 and ahead to 2024 for trends in absenteeism. We're very glad you're joining us. Quick introductions. I'm honored to be here with Alison Teegarden, co-founder and chief operating officer at TeamSense. Good morning, Alison.
Good morning, Justin. Thanks for letting me join.
Of course. And then I am Justin Sears, Chief Marketing Officer at TeamSense. Without further ado, let's jump into what we're going to be talking about today. We aggregate attendance data from our customers, and we use that for advice and benchmarking. And Alison, just kick us off. Why did we decide to do this, to accumulate all of the data on all of our customers? What led to
Yeah,
this
totally.
project?
It's interesting. It's been such a privilege partnering with a variety of customers across the US and Canada in their manufacturing. And one of the challenges that we've consistently seen working with our customers is how difficult it is for them to get true benchmarks. They're just struggling. I mean, in theory, there's the US Department of Labor provides statistics, but those statistics are so limited. They're often based on a snapshot taken during 1 week of the year. And so they're really not representative. And so we knew that we had, a lot of really interesting and unique data at hand and wanted to be able to use it to help further our customers as they work towards more success for their organizations.
And that's exactly what we're going to do right now in this webinar. So before I go any further, I forgot the housekeeping. You all have question and answer in the Zoom meeting. So please send us questions. We're blocked time at the end. We want this to be interactive at the end. We've got a lot of folks on the line I can see. So send in questions and we'll get to those in the last 5 or 10 minutes. Let's look at the data. As I mentioned, we aggregate this. This is anonymized. Of course, we take our customer data privacy very seriously. So we've scrubbed anything that's identifiable. But we wanted to share some of the trends that we saw in 2023. We're in a time of year where we're looking back at what happened and thinking about what might change this year. And let's start with the when. This was very interesting about looking at when people were calling off or when absences were occurring. Tuesdays, who thought Tuesdays was going to be in there? Well, do you know the secret? Why?
Most people guess Mondays, honestly, Justin. If when this comes up, it's fun trivia, right? With this, the one thing I would say here is obviously we are doing this is an aggregation across many different organizations, and um, honestly, we're looking at about 500,000 different absence days that are represented in this data. And so, while at an aggregate level, Tuesdays are the most likely day of the week for absences, if I were to zoom in on any specific organization, it does change. So we see some customers with Mondays, we see some customers with Fridays. It is somewhat customer specific. And so I would encourage anybody on the line who is an existing customer, if you'd want to have a conversation about what patterns we see in your specific data, we'd love to do that. Reach out to your customer success manager. If you're not sure how to contact them, you can always email them at success@teamsense.com and they'll be in touch.
Success@teamsense.com. That's great. Okay, so Tuesdays, surprise. In fact, I was looking at this, and Mondays and Fridays have the lowest absence rate. Again, like you said, in the aggregate. So this might not apply to every one of our customers. Of course, you're going to find some TeamSense users that have very high absence rates on certain days that are particular to their location or their production schedule or the type of work they do. But let's look at month. Also another surprise for me. Beginning of the year, on average, the customers that we serve are starting with higher absence rates in January, February, and March. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, there's probably a couple factors going on here. So one is just seasonality. So people do tend to get sick early in the year.
Flu season.
It's cold for most of the country. So unless you're working in San Diego, you probably are going to see more of your employees out sick. And as we're going to look at, data, I think on the next slide, we'll see that sick accounts for a significant proportion of absences. The other piece here is that what we've observed with the different organizations that we work with is that there's some organizations who have attendance policies, either whether they're point structured or maybe they have a certain number of um, PTO days or whatnot allocated every year. There's some organizations that reset that on January 1st, where essentially
Mm,
everybody in the organization is re-upped for the year. And what we see is organizations that have that kind of policy often experience a spike in absenteeism in the early part of the year. Sort of like, yay, I've got a bunch of potential days to call
uh,
off. And so
money in the bank, so to
it's money
speak.
in the bank, right?
Yeah.
And so you see a bunch of call offs. Organizations that choose sort of an alternative attendance policy that maybe is based on, say, the employee's start date and sort of going off of a rolling 12 months from their start date don't tend to see such a big spike at one part of the year. It's more modulated or over the course of the year. Of course, managing that kind of an attendance policy is often more operationally taxing. It's really easy to just say on Jan 1, every single person gets reset. But it can help reduce some of the spikiness that you're seeing here because obviously something like this, it makes it much more difficult for operational planning in Q1.
And of course, one of the benefits that we talk with our customers about is reducing overall absenteeism by making uh, the call off process easier. So when people need to miss, they can communicate that information quickly. And ironically, that tends to reduce rates of absenteeism at a site over time. Okay,
Absolutely.
fantastic. And I'll just point out, as you were talking, November and December at first, when I saw these low absence rates, I thought, oh, it's because of the holidays. There's probably some of that, but also people are running out of their elective days
They
towards the
can
end
be
of the
running
year.
out of days by the end of
Yeah,
the year.
yeah. Well, fantastic. Okay, so let's look at the why. Why were people absent in 2023? And you mentioned illness, and also I just point out there's a separate sliver in here for COVID. We've pulled that out as a slightly different, of course, that's a form of illness, but uh, the history of TeamSense. Talk to us about why the company was started and what you've seen in the last 3 years since we started.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Justin. So for those of you who aren't aware, TeamSense actually started in the thick of COVID in 2020, and we were looking for an opportunity to help, uh, folks that were in manufacturing organizations who really couldn't work from home, um, return to work in a way that was safe and effective. And so one of the first things that we started offering was COVID screening, where employees would actually receive a survey from TeamSense at a scheduled time before their shift every day. They would fill it out. It usually took them about 10 seconds, and all of that data was then aggregated for administrators. And for many of the organizations we worked with, this took an enormous headache of getting shifts up and running and trying to respond to the different federal and state mandates on how you were supposed to make sure that your employees were safe. And it ensured that all the records and documentation were there. So it's interesting to see that, when we started in 2020, pretty much all of the absences we tracked were COVID related. And now,
Hmm.
it's just a fraction of the total. And so also encouraging to see, at the time, I think in 2020, there was a lot of concern about what was this going to mean for the future of manufacturing in the US. And we've seen that, it's still there and it's still meaningful for those who struggle with it. But it's really something that we can say we have together managed to make it such that it doesn't have a significant impact on the different organizations we work with.
And I'm sure that reflects a change in the pandemic, but also we've added new functionality since you started in 2020. There are other uses of TeamSense now that didn't exist before. So, for example, I'm looking at partial absences, such as late arrival, is a big slice of the pie here. Um, what's behind that large shift?
Yeah, so yeah, you've got late arrival and you also see early departure. So together, those two partial absences are about 14% of the total. And I think the important thing here is that the the speed and simplicity of the call off solution is what enables this data to come in. So if you imagine, I'm somebody who's stuck in traffic, or, was taking my kid to work this morning and we were running late. If you're running 10 or 15 minutes late and it's going to be complicated for you to call off, you're navigating some phone tree, you're waiting on hold for an operator, many people will just not bother and they'll just show up late, which of course makes planning much more difficult for supervisors on the floor, trying to figure out, okay, the shift is starting, I don't have all my people here, is anybody going to show up? Not clear. And so being able to be aware of those late arrivals really depends on the simplicity and ease of use of your call-off solution. And so with TeamSense, what we found is that employees that previously wouldn't have bothered to call off and would simply show up late or be a no-call, no-show are now much more likely to inform their organizations that they're not going to be there. And this enables organizations to be much more agile and strategic around how they're setting up their shifts each day.
And Alison, I'm reminded of one customer site that I visited, and one of the employees had car trouble and was actually broken down on the side of the
Yeah.
road. And now normally if you're going to navigate a phone tree or leave a message, you're just trying to get to safety, and you want people to know that you're not coming in or you're going to be late. But in this case, because this worker had TeamSense, she notified her team immediately, and they actually rolled a truck to push the car off the side of the road and then bring her in. So she went from danger and probably going to miss a day's work to given the opportunity for her employer to help her out, rescue her in effect, and then she finished the day at work. That was everybody was smiling when they were telling that story, for sure. And then what about, so, and I see vacation PTO on here. Is everybody using us to track PTO and vacation as well?
Yeah, so we have some customers who use us to track scheduled absences. So many people come to us with the chief concern of helping them with unscheduled absences, with call-offs, and then reducing those unscheduled absences with some of our unique features. We do have customers that use us to track scheduled absences, and the way they do that is either they kind of create a set of options within their absence survey that enables employees to kind of go down a different route in the survey and specify a future date of absence. Some organizations actually set up a separate survey just for PTO requests. And so you could do it a couple different ways. The one caveat I'll say is that currently in TeamSense, there isn't an approval workflow, but that's something that's coming later in the year. And so we're really excited to get more into partnering with organizations on managing scheduled absences.
So for existing customers or prospective customers, we'd be interested in working with you on
We
that
absolutely
now.
would. And many of you, any of you are on the line who are existing customers know that our modus operandi is really working side by side to design these features, get your feedback, test them with you before we sort of provide them more broadly. And so if you are interested in working with us on designing the scheduled absence experience, we'd love to hear from you. And you can always send the product team a message at ideas@teamsense.com.
Ideas@teamsense.com. We want to hear from you. Okay, so let's blow out the COVID sliver here. As you remind us, we started with COVID. One of the things that was interesting, when you mentioned earlier in the webinar, we have more than 500,000 absence days recorded for 2023, and that gives us a very large pool of information. I did the graph on the left and just looked at COVID-related illnesses. And there's lots of codes because our customers can set up different codes. So some of them said C19, COVID-19, COVID-19, COVID. But if you add all those up, you see the curve here of reasons for people calling out for because of COVID reasons. On the right, public data about COVID deaths. So I want to make the distinction. The one on the left was people not coming to work. The one on the right was lives lost due to COVID. But it was interesting to me, Alison, to see the curve has the same shape. So I would have been worried maybe a little bit if the pattern of COVID was so different, because we do have such a large data set at TeamSense. It was interesting to me to see that the curve basically reflected what we were seeing was reflected by what health authorities, national level health authorities are saying.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And while it's a sobering chart, I think it speaks to just the volume of data that we have at TeamSense now, as we're looking across different organizations across North America, and the number of employees that are currently using TeamSense. We can get to meaningful patterns, and it's interesting to be able to look at this data in the past, but then I think also it gives us potential insights into the future as well.
And I think that's a great pivot. Let's stay with the what the experts are saying idea, and let's take what we've learned from our data in 2023, and we can be armchair quarterbacks here, Allison,
That's always dangerous, Justin.
and say whether we think the experts are right or wrong, or compare it with what we're seeing with our customers on the ground. I think is really interesting. So the first study that I came across when I was preparing for this is U.S. manufacturing is having a renaissance. This is from Goldman Sachs research. So of course they're interested in looking at where is manufacturing headed from a job growth and investment perspective. Uh, Really reassuring for the manufacturing industry and the customers that we serve. There are a lot of new production capabilities going in, and just ask you to reflect. Is this what you've seen since you started? I mean, you were in manufacturing before TeamSense, but are you surprised by this trend? Have you seen it coming?
I wouldn't say this is surprising based on what we're hearing from our customers, what we're obviously seeing in the news. Um, this is an interesting chart. So looking at this, obviously this is focused on really massive projects that are breaking ground. So this is completely new facilities that haven't existed before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's interesting here is you're seeing a few sectors get a lot of investment. So semiconductors, battery plants, clean energy. Those are getting a lot of investment. There's a lot of federal funding that's coming into those sectors, and so that makes sense. I think even outside of the projects that are breaking ground, though, if we just look more broadly across manufacturing as a sector in North America, we're seeing growth across the industry, and I think that's a factor that's coming from we've got a lot of a lot of organizations are either nearshoring or reshoring work that may have been done elsewhere between some of the supply chain disruptions that organizations have experienced over the last several years, geopolitical tensions that are adding uncertainty into how we're going to navigate supply chain. I think a lot of organizations are really seeking to bring more back home. And so I'd say while looks like it's focused on a few specific sectors, more broadly, I think we're seeing the opportunity for even existing facilities to be growing their output and also growing the number of employees working there.
And it's actually pretty amazing how much is going on in Texas. And one of the first TeamSense customers I visited was a site in Texas, and I was trying to think back. Well, that site was pretty well established, but if people are breaking new ground and starting to think about maybe even a year from now, a year and a half from now, running the line for the first time, when should they start thinking about using TeamSense?
Oh, that's a great question, Justin. We've had some customers, as they're breaking new ground on a facility, start using us literally as their first employees are joining. So from the
Hmm.
point that they have employee number one, they're using TeamSense, and every employee that they're hiring and they're bringing in the door, they are literally onboarding them with TeamSense. They had it set up such that they would send out these onboarding messages to employees to say, welcome to the organization. This is the TeamSense number, save it in your phone. We're so excited to have you here. Kind of what to expect from the organization, and so from day one, employees knew like this was sort of the way that their organization worked with them and communicated with them, and there was no change management or anything like that. It was just really easy to have everybody on it from day one.
That's fantastic. And of course, if the production's already running and then you're bringing in TeamSense afterwards, the training requirement's still pretty low because it's such an intuitive. So it's
It
not that
is.
it's not that if you run that first day of production and you want to add TeamSense later, it's not that hard, but it is kind of interesting to have it as part of the integrated experience for the employee from day one.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so let's look at another expert prediction. And production capabilities are going up, but the labor market's still tight. And this is one where this is right in our sweet spot here at TeamSense. We spent a lot of time with customers talking about um, getting new employees onboarded, programs to retain those employees. Just talk to us in general. How does TeamSense help uh, managers or supervisors or GMs that are dealing with this? Look at the green line. I mean, it continues to the demand for labor continues to be much higher than the supply. How does TeamSense help supervisors manage that or GMs manage that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So just a quick look at the chart, obviously looking at this, it's showing how many job openings there are for an unemployed person previously employed in manufacturing. And right now we're looking at anywhere from, say, 1.5 to 2.5 jobs that are open versus people available to fill them. And I think everybody is feeling this. Our customers are feeling the competition when it comes to talent, and particularly with some of the wage pressures that we're seeing in the market with inflation. It's making things really challenging. And so one of the most important
That's it
things that
right here. Hourly
there
earnings
you go,
increase
right?
4%.
Average hourly earnings is increasing significantly. And so um, one of the things that organizations are really looking at is how do we differentiate ourselves as an employer? What is our employer brand to the employees that we're seeking to attract? And one of the biggest ways that they can do this is figuring out ways to connect more personally to their employees. And so engagement is a huge theme of sort of the last, I'd say, 2 years and going forward. We've seen a lot of customers come to us asking, how do we keep our employees engaged? What are ways we can use TeamSense to do that? And a lot of creative ideas come out of that. So we've got customers that are using TeamSense to send out surveys to employees. Some customers who were struggling to even get a pulse on what the engagement was of their hourly workforce. They couldn't get response rates to any sort of engagement survey higher than 10-15%. They're now using TeamSense to distribute those, and now their response rates are 80-90%, just world class. Other customers are using TeamSense's
And
communicate
let me
feature.
pause you. And the reason for that, we believe, is just because it's so much easier.
Oh, it's so much
The
easier.
survey goes to people's phones and they don't have to log in somewhere else, and they can take it with their thumbs rather than having to schedule some time.
It's so much easier. You have reliable contact information for your employees. You know how to put a survey in front of them. And for employees, making the survey as easy as possible significantly increases the likelihood you're going to get a response. A lot of organizations are struggling with systems like kiosks,
Mm,
or with some of our customers, paper surveys. They're distributing surveys via paper, and then somebody needs to go manually code those all in to some sort of database so that they can do analysis. And so the amount of time and effort it takes to just get a simple pulse on the organization, this isn't even improving engagement yet. This is just understanding where you're at. You really can't take action until you get the data. And so the amount of effort that's going into that makes it such that a lot of organizations will not even bother. Like they'll just give up.
mm,
Like it's too hard.
yeah.
And so, to see an organization who is struggling with this go to, wow, we were able to get a pulse of what 90% of our workforce was feeling was transformative for them. And so the ability to send a survey through TeamSense has been really helpful. Other customers, what we've seen is a very enthusiastic use of the communicate feature. So um, those of you who are familiar with TeamSense know that you can use TeamSense to essentially send messages out to your workforce, whether it's a single employee, a team, or an entire site. And so we have customers that are using that to drive more personal engagement. It could be things like they send messages to, say, everybody who hit a work anniversary on a certain month and congratulating them. It could be specific shout outs to certain teams, like, hey, shout out to the quality team. Thank you all for making sure the shipment made it across the line today. It could be announcements for events, contests, making sure benefits are well understood. But just showing basically a very human interaction between the organization and the individual employee, I think is what TeamSense has enabled them to do. And so previously, it's not like these programs didn't exist, but often employees weren't aware of them, or it felt very faceless. And
Mm.
so TeamSense has been able to bring a more personal touch to that.
All right. Well, you mentioned surveys, and I'm signing you up for a webinar soon so you can show that functionality. Is probably difficult for some people that haven't used TeamSense
Awesome.
to understand how easy. So I've got you down for that. And then that's a great pivot into this next point about quiet quitting and engagement with customers. You've already mentioned this a little bit. Gallup did a study that was then reported in Forbes. 6 out of 10 U.S. employees are quiet quitting. And you see in here improving workplace culture, feeling connected with their teammates, and we've taken a kind of a mocked up screenshot here on the right. Uh, what are some of the ways that our customers tell us that we help improve engagement? You mentioned surveys and getting the information. So you have to know whether people are engaged or at what level people are engaged first to know whether you're improving that. But then there's a lot of tools in TeamSense to actually do something about it and improve those scores. What are some of the ways that people are using TeamSense to improve engagement and then probably by extension retention as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so what you're seeing here actually on this image is an example of what I was just describing, which is being able to use TeamSense to send a very personalized message. Previously, this was difficult or impossible to do. In many cases, things had to be done in person. And frankly, at the scale of many of our organizations, that's just difficult. You're talking about hundreds, thousands of employees working across multiple shifts. It can be very difficult to personally get in touch with different employees all the time. And so this TeamSense has provided that extension to be able to say, I still want to personally connect with, in this case, Jane Morrison, and let her know she's appreciated. But it would have been difficult in a past without TeamSense to be able to do that. And so that's an example of some of the connectivity that we're fostering. I think in many ways, employees are feeling a much stronger connection to their organizations is what we're seeing. So whether it's feeling a sense of I'd say a sense that your employer is caring about you and communicating directly to you, or it's feeling that they actually understand a little bit more of your situation and can respond better. I think we're seeing both of those things. And even that example that you mentioned earlier about the employee whose car broke down and their supervisor responded and was able to go help them. That was a moment that was really driven by the supervisor, right? The supervisor really taking things into their own hands and going and helping the employee. But TeamSense made that possible. Without the ease of use of TeamSense, without the immediate notification, that supervisor wouldn't have been able to take that action. And the really interesting thing about that situation is what we learned talking to that customer was that after that, they saw retention increase, engagement increase, because what happened was that employee came back and told everybody, said, you know what? This company actually cares about us. This company cares about me. You know what my supervisor came and did for me today? And so being able to connect employees in that way where they can respond in sort of the most human and empathic way, I think is what TeamSense is enabling.
That's wonderful. I love hearing that story repeated again because uh it is about that connection and creating, some people might worry, oh, TeamSense is gonna automate and then we're just all gonna become robots and send each other texts. No, what it's doing is it's freeing up people to have those human it's saving people time on the mundane, repetitive things so that they can spend more time interacting with one another as human beings.
That's 100% right, Justin. And something that, we talk to our customers about all the time. The goal of TeamSense is not to automate away the humanity of what we do. The people that work on these teams are the most important thing. The supervisors, the associates on the floor, the HR teams, the ops teams. How do we take away all of the things that are getting in the way of their connection today and instead enable them to make that connection? And I think that example with the supervisor helping out that employee stranded is a really perfect example for that.
And before we get to questions, because I know we're running a little long, but it's great. So hopefully the attendees, you can hang in with us a little bit longer. But let's look at supply chain because we've been talking about the people, but the parts, the products need to be there. And you know, one that jumped out on me on this study was really unseen events and uh, talk. We have a we're in the stormy part of the year, so storms are top of mind. But what are some of the acts of God that happen that we help our customers respond to?
Yeah, absolutely, Justin. It's funny. I think supply chain professionals are among the unsung heroes of industry, often behind the scenes, but making everything happen. And so the last several years have really brought them into the limelight, for better or for worse. And so we've seen obviously a lot of disruptions to supply chain globally, and everything from sort of geopolitical events to weather related. And I think the biggest thing for organizations here is obviously understanding your parts supply chain is critical, but understanding your preparedness from a people perspective as well is really important. And so, we've worked with customers who are either in areas of the country where you might have significant storms, you may need to shut down the facility for everybody's safety, you may experience even a power outage at the facility. And so notifying employees of that is critical. We've talked to customers who, before TeamSense, their method of notifying employees was call the radio station, uh, divide up all employees' phone numbers and call them one by one, stand outside the facility in potentially snowy, dangerous weather and just tell everybody that arrives to go home, and just crazy things. And instead, with TeamSense, the ability to send a text message that takes 30 seconds to write and notify immediately everyone is pretty transformative and keeps everyone safer.
And this is very apropos. There's a question that just came in. Can you give me some examples of how customers have used TeamSense data to inform action? And I don't know if it was specifically about the slide. I'll give one answer. The Speaking of storms, we had a customer who was in the path of Hurricane Idalia, and they closed the plant, but then they were worried about there was so much damage in the area. They were worried about the health and safety of their employees. And within 5 hours, they sent out a survey on TeamSense, and they were able to account for the safety of every employee in that site. And I think a couple of them had actually lost homes, so
Right.
we're able to again reach out, make sure everyone's safe, and that nobody would have been able to do that out in those roads, or and actually the landlines were blown over, so the mobile signal was really the only way to do that, and it was really reassuring for the leaders at that site to know that their people were safe. That's one example.
Yeah.
You one more, and then we'll.
Yeah, no, that story was really cool too because there were a few employees that did need help, and the organization would have had no idea who needed help and what to do. And so they were able to connect directly with those employees and make sure they had what they needed. And it's another example of something where, TeamSense made sort of that human connection possible. I saw actually some of the comments that came back from employees who took that survey, and a lot of them were, no, I'm fine, but thank you for asking. It means so much that you would reach out. And so again, it's not that this sort of thing. It's not that TeamSense created that connection. It was really the people of that organization that made that happen. But TeamSense made it possible to execute on their vision. And so I think it's another really cool example of engagement that's coming out of that connectivity.
I've seen one more question coming in, so we'll get to that in a second. But to wrap up, and this from, I believe it was last week's webinar, the week before, we spoke with Cassandra Cammons, who's CHRO for U.S. Operations at Clayens. And before that webinar, she had told us that the sooner we know about an absence, the better we can plan for it. TeamSense allows us to mitigate the impact of an absence by giving managers immediate, clear information so that no one is scrambling to figure out the schedule. We can find coverage quickly and prevent downtime. So we've been talking a little bit more about the employee experience, but for the supervisors, and you mentioned it earlier, Alison, just getting that 10 or 15 minutes heads up on whether someone's going to be late, or knowing early in the day that somebody really is not going to be there, that allows those leaders to adjust and maintain their production schedules, or at least not fall too far behind at the beginning of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, in a world where, you got to get product out the door, we have to make rate. We have customers that are relying on us. We need to know as soon as possible if there's any disruption to plans. And so being able to do that is crucial. And TeamSense enabling that immediate notification and even aggregating that information so a manager can see it at one glance versus like listening to 30 voicemails, I think can make an enormous difference in helping them be prepared for the day.
Okay, quick plug for next Tuesday. Our other co-founder and our CEO will join me, and we're going to do a little bit more prediction. We're going to go deeper into looking at how absenteeism is changing, and Sheila Stafford will be in conversation with me about that. Q&A, we have time for one more question, and I see it came in about reporting. So the question was, how can I do my own reporting in TeamSense, or do I need to go through the dashboard?
So great question. So looking at all of the data that we were looking at earlier, where we were seeing sort of attendance trends, obviously it's really helpful for each organization to look at them for themselves. So there is some of this available within the admin experience. If you're an existing customer, we have an Insights tab that is available. So feel free to reach out again if you're not sure how to use that, to reach out to our customer success team at success@teamsense.com. But this Insights tab helps you identify certain trends in your organization. If you have multiple sites, it will show absence rate across different sites. It will highlight certain employees that may have higher absences than the typical, and it will also highlight employees that have perfect attendance over a certain period of time. And so this can give you a picture to be able to start acting on certain things. In fact, we've seen some organizations actually change certain policies or processes based on some of the observations they've made with TeamSense data. So encourage you to go check that out. If you want to really dig into more data beyond that, again, I'd encourage you to reach out to our success team. If you're a current customer, they'd love to walk you through kind of what we observe in your data and see how we can use it to help you and your organization be more successful.
Well, thank you, Alison. I'll close just going back to the one for next week. Thank you for spending the time sharing these insights. Thank you to all the attendees who joined. We really enjoy putting these on every Tuesday, and it it's only possible with the attendees asking great questions and showing up. So thank you, Alison. Thank you for joining, and we'll wrap it up now. Enjoy your day, everybody.
Thanks, Justin. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic week.